Yeah.
I will be writing in Julian Assange this November. If there's really nothing anybody can do to convince me to vote for Joe Biden, if Donald Trump wants to pardon or drop the charges against Assange between now and November, I will vote for Trump. But that aside, no, I'm going to be writing in a person who's not even eligible to be an American president, and that is how much respect I have for the political process in this country.
Speaking of Assange, since I have you guys here right now, I think transition to that topic. So what we discussed on Thursday, what happened from Monday through Thursday. So I just want to hear a couple more updates that happened yesterday on Friday. So could you fill us in on what's been going on in the court hearing?
We've been in a little bit of a delay, actually, and not for any really solid good reason in defense of Julian Assange. We were put on a delay on Thursday morning because one of the U.S. prosecutor's husbands was showing signs of COVID.
Yeah.
So the whole thing was put to a halt until COVID tests came back. It was expected that they would start again on Monday the 14th. And I believe yesterday they confirmed that both the U.S. prosecutor and her husband tested negative, so they will be continuing on Monday. So we've been getting through maybe about 1 to 2 witnesses a day so far. This part of the hearing could last anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks, depending on how quickly they move through the witness segments of this. Not a ton to update on now, other than that we will be continuing again on Monday.
Yeah, I want to ask you guys, the person who's representing U.S. authorities right now is James Lewis. So I want to hear if you guys did some research on this guy and how has his performance been during the hearing, and how have the witnesses' performance who are representing Assange have been during the hearings?
The big messages I have taken away from what the witnesses are saying is really talking about the one point is that, this isn't just the Justice Department coming after Assange. This is motivated by and initiated by the Trump administration. This isn't something that Trump can really wash his hands of and say, there's nothing I can do. I had no control. This is the deep state taking over. That seems like a really invalid point so far. And the other thing that's really being discussed here is the journalistic practice of publishing classified material and potentially protecting sources. If anybody else would be publishing in the same way as WikiLeaks did. The fact that these cables that were released unredacted before WikiLeaks published. There's actually a scene in the documentary Risk where you see Julian Assange calling Hillary Clinton's office and explain to them that they had a problem, that these have been released and not by WikiLeaks, and the State Department didn't really seem to take them seriously. We also know by firsthand accounts that Julian Assange was very concerned about redactions and protecting anybody that might be named in there. And out of the 4 journalistic outfits that were participating in this release, he was the only one that cared about redactions. The Guardian, Der Spiegel, and New York Times did not. And we're kind of going over the same stuff that if you follow Julian Assange, if you followed the hearings in the last 2 years, if you understand the situation and the history, we all know this stuff. Now, this is important things that the public should know about, because a lot of people don't understand these key elements to this case. They don't understand that the United States government has testified in court that nobody was hurt by these cables and nobody was killed by these cables and this classified information being released. But of course, as we talked about before, the media is not doing a very good job of relaying this information once again. And so we are kind of at a stalemate of having any more public support garnered from this hearing.
Yeah, the mainstream media has failed us yet again. They're not talking about this. Mainstream progressive media has failed us yet again. TYT's throwing birthday parties for Bernie Sanders and showing videos of Joe Biden congratulating Bernie Sanders on his birthday instead of talking about Assange. People have to go on Twitter to keep up with the hearing. And I talked about it on Thursday I was telling people check out Kevin Gostola, who's been updating on his Twitter a lot. Subscribe to Christy and Dak as well, and go check out overwritten.org. And Pierce also had a video with Dak. So Pierce, you had something to say. So what was it?
Yeah, we were mentioning that like mainstream media isn't covering Julian Assange. I did, this Julian Assange and his plight isn't my wheelhouse as much as it is Christine Dack. So I mean, on the nuance, I would usually defer to them. But I did think that it was interesting that The Hill, TV's Rising with Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty, a sort of controversial subject or show amongst leftists and progressives. Some people thinking that they're kind of bad actors. I personally kind of check into that show quite often. I think a lot of people do. They see it as like if it can't be perfect, it's at least better than watching any of the main cable TV news channels. And they themselves, they opened up their segment, which they did with Glenn Greenwald, and they were like, I think we're the only outlet talking about it. And for sure, there are like leftists and people on Twitter that are talking about Julian Assange, not just leftists, but also like independent actors on Twitter and on YouTube that know how important Julian Assange's case is. But yeah, I was just surprised that Rising did a segment on Julian Assange with Glenn Greenwald, because I think the last time they spoke on Julian Assange, they had goofy shit to say about his behavior in the embassy, as opposed to addressing the
they were sort of getting a good laugh out of the reports that Julian wasn't taking care of his cat, and that he was a dirty, filthy tenant, and just sort of joking around about that.
And last thing that I will add is we mentioned the conversation I had with Dak about Julian Assange on the last Overwritten report. I would ask our audience to check that out. One of the most interesting things I thought that Dak said in that conversation was how much attention you're giving. Rather, a better way of saying it is, with Julian Assange being held in prison in solitary confinement, which is torture because we're social animals, our immune system just starts degrading when we're alone for that long, and you're over here medicating him. He's like in a prison where he's like surrounded by violent offenders. It's just really messed up stuff. Like Dak pointed out rightly, that you're giving him so much publicity, and he may very well be a effective martyr for a cause that I guess, like, I don't know if it's around the world, but there are definitely people in the West that it's like they know how important it is to have an independent media outlet that isn't affiliated with corporations, that is speaking out against the worst excesses of governments all around the world. And it's that I just like thought that was a really helpful thing to point out in our conversation. And one of the things I'm thinking of is, we could be litigating his situation in public. He could be interacting with his lawyers. He could be with his family and his kid. Yeah. But no, he's like in prison, usually in solitary confinement. And I think that if the nuance isn't something that carries the weight of this case forward in the minds of the public, I think focusing on his personal plight, because I mean, I think human beings are just kind of that way. We're more emotionally oriented as opposed to logically oriented. I just think like this is something that even if his case is litigated publicly, there's no reason to treat the man this way. It's incredibly, it's like honestly the worst part of it for me. Me not being my wheelhouse as much as it is Dak and Christie's.
Well, this was something I had written about at overwritten.org a year and a half ago, which is that the American empire has cut its nose to spite its face. If the American government had just disregarded what WikiLeaks was doing, then the American government would have plausible deniability and would be able to say, we have nothing to hide. That's why we're allowing these publications to continue. Now, on another note, I think that Hillary Clinton actually did more damage to Assange's reputation than the United States government ever could when she convinced her extremely gullible followers that Julian Assange was working on behalf of the Russian government, because that lie seems to have taken hold in a very large percentage of the minds of the American population. And so that seemed to discredit WikiLeaks to the point where the corporate media this past January was able to completely ignore WikiLeaks' revelations about the OPCW report, which showed that the Syrian government did not use chemical weapons against its own citizens. That report was completely ignored. Even Tulsi Gabbard didn't want to speak about it, despite being asked about it multiple times by myself and by Christy Duff. And so the way that WikiLeaks has been demonized and discredited in the eyes of the American people, with that being said, there really is no practical benefit to prosecuting Assange. It's simply a psychopathic form of revenge. And I have no doubt that if this moribund empire somehow survives into the next century, there will be a Julian Assange Day. It will be a national holiday, perhaps on his birthday, much like the United States government pretends that it supported Martin Luther King throughout his life. So I think that there's a great opportunity for martyrdom here and an opportunity for the government to capitalize on that in an extremely cynical and shameless manner. But I don't know that prosecuting him actually accomplishes anything as far as drawing up support for the American war machine.
You bring up a great point about Hillary Clinton playing a key role in demonizing Assange. And I think I've heard more people criticizing Assange and demonizing him who are liberals than conservatives. And I was mentioning mainstream media earlier. I was mainly thinking about MSNBC and CNN and other outlets like that. And I had just remembered that I saw Kevin Gosztola retweet a clip of Glenn Greenwald. We were just talking about him being on Fox News. Yep. So I want to go ahead and play that clip, and then I want to hear your thoughts about that.
The public. He worked with the New York Times, The Guardian, to publish very embarrassing information about the endless war machine, about the neocons who are working in the Obama administration. To understand what's happening here, we can look at a very similar case, which is one that President Trump recently raised, which is the prosecution by the Obama administration as well of Edward Snowden for the same reason, that he exposed the lies that James Clapper told. He exposed how there's this massive spying system that the NSA and the CIA control that they can use against American citizens. And obviously this isn't coming from President Trump. He praised WikiLeaks in 2016 for informing the public. He knows firsthand how these spying systems that Edward Snowden exposed can be abused and were abused in 2016. This is coming from people who work in the CIA, who work in the Pentagon, who insist on endless war, and who believe that they're a government unto themselves, more powerful than the president. I posted this weekend a speech from Dwight Eisenhower warning that this military-industrial complex, what we now call the deep state, is becoming more powerful than the president. Chuck Schumer warned right before President Trump took office that President Trump challenging the CIA was foolish because they have many ways to get back at anybody who impedes them. That's what these cases are about, Tucker. They're punishing Julian Assange and trying to punish Edward Snowden for informing the public about things they have the right to know about the Obama administration. They're basically saying to President Trump, you don't run the country even though you were elected, we do, and they're daring him to use his pardon power to put an end to these very abusive prosecutions, one which resulted in 8 years of punishment for Julian Assange for telling the truth, the other one which resulted in 7 years of exile for Edward Snowden of being in Russia simply for informing the public and embarrassing political officials who are very powerful.
So in 30 seconds, the president could pardon Julian Assange right now and end this. Is that correct?
He could have pardoned him and Edward Snowden, and there's widespread support across the political spectrum on both the right and the left for doing both. It would be politically advantageous for the president. The only people who would be angry would be Susan Rice, John Brennan, Jim Comey, and James Clapper, because they're the ones who both of them exposed.
So the only people that would be upset about Trump pardoning Assange and Snowden would be James Clapper, Susan Rice, just like and people like that. So it's really all on Trump right now. He has the power to pardon these people, and I do have some things that I want to share with you guys about Edward Snowden that I thought was really interesting. But first, I want to hear your thoughts about Glenn Greenwald's comments to Tucker Carlson when he was on Fox News.
Well, I mean, honestly, it was nice that Tucker Carlson brought up Assange. We were discussing earlier today on when the last time he really did talk about Assange, and to have Glenn Greenwald actually doing a few media appearances now to talk about the hearing and what Assange is going through. We need more of that. And somebody like Glenn is somebody that, and Edward Snowden too, sometimes we find a little frustrating because we feel like they do have platforms, they do have some influence, and when they don't help give voice to that, it can be a little frustrating. So it's good to see.
Dak?
Well, the thing is, there's the report that the Hill a while ago said that Donald Trump watches Tucker Carlson every night. Supposedly, this is the only program that he watches from start to finish every single night. And so you hope that he did watch it. You do hope that there is some possibility that he really was uninvolved in the prosecution and that he would be interested in dropping the charges against Assange, if only to spite the folks from the Obama administration. Yeah. You hope that's true. Is that optimistic beyond the point of reason? Quite possibly. Nevertheless, you take what you can get, and the fact that Tucker Carlson was willing to talk to Greenwald about it on September 11th of all days, that gives you some cause for optimism, or at least you get to take a little bit of, I suppose, sadistic pleasure at how that undoubtedly outraged many of the neoliberals. But we'll take what we can get. This actually reminds me quite a bit of the way I phrased the question when I spoke to the Democratic Party candidates. I said, do you support Assange? I asked them, do you agree with the Trump administration in its prosecution of this person? They could not distinguish themselves from Trump politically or ideologically. Perhaps Trump would take this effort or take this opportunity to distinguish himself from the neoliberals. Maybe.
And let's remember also that it was Tucker Carlson that was able to talk Donald Trump out of attacking Iran last year. So I'm trying to hold on to some hope here that he'll probably give Trump a phone call and tell him, you should pardon Assange. I mean, if anything, you could piss off the liberals. So I want to hear from you, Pierce. What do you think?
Something that I didn't get a chance to bounce off of, I really quickly wanted to add that I think that Dak was right when he said that Clinton did tons of damage to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange's reputation by, I guess, her turning it into a political issue and also kind of turning it into a Russiagate issue. That might have, because you always hear liberals critique it from that point of view, where it's like WikiLeaks gave Trump the election in 2016, but you never hear these liberals even mention like the Afghanistan papers and like the stuff that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange have kind of published that have let us know some of these skeletons in our country's closet. I thought that it was interesting that Chris Hayes very recently mentioned Julian Assange in the context that Donald Trump is going after a journalist. So I think that MSNBC might have just been using it as using Julian Assange as a cudgel to hit Trump over the head with, as they do a number of issues. But I guess that does kind of go against a Clinton machine-owned media. So I think that that's interesting. And as you pointed out, Franco, Tucker Carlson, along with Iran, has given voice to certain issues that the ostensive left media wouldn't cover. I mean, I don't think that the United States has a political left that is public facing to the public. MSNBC would not cover OBCW or have Tulsi Gabbard on to talk about regime change war or the Russiagate stuff. Won't really talk about Julian Assange too often, but you'll often find that Fox News will give voice to these people and those issues. And I just find that dynamic so interesting. It's kind of like there's this aside from the two parties and kind of their more forward-facing identity political issues, there's kind of some underlying support. I don't know, amongst those actors where they sometimes will mention these issues. And I think these are more interesting issues that Americans should be thinking about more than their identity politics on both sides.
All right, Christine, Dak, I hate to see you guys go, but farewell. Hope you enjoy your evening. It's great having you on. Thank you so much for being here.
Always good. We'll talk to you again, guys. We'll see you again.
Thanks for having us on.
Bye-bye.
Adios. Peace.